Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, From Risk Tolerance to Real Life, Rethinking Financial Planning for Every Generation. I'm Johnny Swift of Impact Communications, and I'll be your host today for this insightful webinar featuring John O'Connell of the Oasis Group and Jeff Coyle of Libretto, where you'll learn how and why the traditional approach to financial planning is inadequate and why advisors instead need to offer personalized solutions that address diverse generational needs, all within the framework of delivering life cycle planning and investing. So before we get started, a quick intro to each of our guests. Jeff Coyle is founder of Libretto, a powerful advice platform that unifies planning, total wealth portfolios, and risk management for RIAs and family offices. And John O'Connell is founder of the Oasis Group, which is a leading consultancy for the wealth management industry. So thank you both for joining me today. And one quick note before we jump in, we're going to hold all audience questions until the end, but if you have a question, please submit them either in the chat box or the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And with that, I want to jump right into the conversation. And Jeff, we're going to start with you. You argue that traditional financial planning is inadequate for today's wealth management clients. Can you walk us through what the traditional approach looks like and specifically where it falls short when serving different generations?
No, sure. At a high level, what we think we need to replace simulation with personalization. And kind of to understand that, let's step back and think about the puzzle itself. What game are we playing? Are we in a game of risk or are we in a game of uncertainty? And our industry really assumes that we're in a game of risk. And we give clients risk questionnaires, model portfolios, we run Monte Carlo simulations, and we actually confuse that for risk management. Now, when you think about a game of risk, a casino is a good example of a game of risk. They have thousands and millions of people flipping coins and rolling dice. And what's interesting about that is you can roll a die. If you roll a die enough times, on average, a 2 is going to show up every 6 rolls. And the reason that's important, it's predictable. Casinos know what's going to happen. They know they're going to be profitable. All they have to do is have enough people play the game, and they're going to be profitable. Now, I'll make a point here. In a game that's predictable, this is where a Monte Carlo is a suitable solution because it's modeling a predictable outcome. Now, when you think about our life and the life of our clients, very little in our life is predictable. We actually live in a world of uncertainty, and that's the game we're actually in. And when one manages uncertainty, you use very different tools. I'll give you an example. Am I going to die tomorrow or live a long life? And equally as important, was I prepared for both of those possibilities? What if we lose our job or become disabled? Maybe our home is destroyed, we're subject to a liability claim. We experience a long-term care event or maybe a prolonged economic and market downturn. And when you look at the problem itself, you realize a Monte Carlo doesn't address most of those risks. And what we really need to do is personalize risk management and apply solutions that address each possibility. So when you're applying these methods, you can apply hedges to immunize an essential level of spending in retirement. You can apply insurance and do it systematically. You can address the risk of their properties, their businesses, their personal risks. A personal risk might be death, disability, personal liability, healthcare, long-term care as an example. We can also apply protective reserves. These are small pools of money held in short-term fixed income, and they buy us time. So if we lose our job in a downturn, we've got the time to retrain, find another job, and start saving for retirement. Or maybe we own a rental property, and that property goes vacant in a downturn. We've got the time to adapt while we're losing money. Now, when you think about what I'm really doing here is I'm introducing a liability-driven framework. And this framework is applied to a unified planning, portfolio, and risk management process. And by the way, this is what institutions do. So when you think about an insurance company, they have many different exposures. They've written property and casualty insurance, life and disability insurance. They're addressing corporate risks, among many others. And their puzzle is really to consider how do they invest their capital or apply a solution to offset each of those different risks so that they're not exposed and out of business when stress hits. That's the exact same puzzle we have with private clients, but we're dealing with a different set of risks, resources, and priorities. So this, in summary, we really need to move beyond risk questionnaires, model portfolios, and Monte Carlos, and apply more advanced methods, delivering more robust solutions and personalized solutions.
And, each generation from baby boomers to Gen Z, they seem to have distinct financial priorities and risk tolerances. John, how can advisors identify and adapt to these generational differences in their practices?
So it's really interesting what Jeff brought up, right? I want to touch on one of the things that he said and then answer your question, Johnny.
Yeah.
Jeff brought up some of the limitations around Monte Carlo simulations, and that is incredibly important for people to understand. What Monte Carlo is trying to do is it's trying to take a very diverse set of variables and distill those down with a bunch of assumptions. Let's take a really basic example of that. Many Monte Carlo simulations ask you to make an assumption on inflation. What you're really trying to do is you're making some sort of assumption that is going to take you over 30 or 40 years of that Monte Carlo simulation based on something that is inherently very unknown, right? Look at today's economic environment. We have a lot of uncertainty in the market right now, some of which is due to trade imbalances and tariff discussions, some of which is due to market performance and inflation rates. But by trying to distill down something into one really small variable and making that assumption and then having Monte Carlo run it over such a long period of time is really where you're building in this ability to have wobble in your financial models that is going to carry through for a really long amount of time. Any significant changes to those underlying assumptions pretty much blows up the model, right? And you have to kind of redo it. Another really important piece that Jeff brought up. Now let's add on top of that this layer of complexity that you see with different generations. And that layer of complexity changes over time. So right now, Gen Z, those are folks that are between like 13 and 28 right now, right? They're really early on. So they're trying to pay off student loan debt. In some cases, that student loan debt might be quite debilitating for them. So over time, they've got to figure out how do you pay that off? How do you do budgeting? How do you do cash flow analysis? And then ultimately, how are you trying to plan for your retirement? Because the student loan debt may take you a decade to pay off. You can't hold off retirement planning for a whole decade. You're losing that whole very important high value of money while you do that. So then when you start looking at millennials at this point, right? They're still managing credit card debt. These are the folks between, they're still managing student loan debt. These are the folks between like 29 and 44. So they're still handling student loan debt at this point, on the tail end of it for sure. They're at a point now where they're really trying to figure out, how do I save for retirement beyond like a 401k that I might have had through work? And they're really beginning to get into some of those bigger earning years, where they're trying to figure out how do they balance their money and own a home, and maybe even pay off a home if they'd like to become a debt-free person. Completely different set of priorities, right? So financial planning not only has these really big pieces of uncertainty that we kind of gloss over with a Monte Carlo simulation, but it also has this really highly changing set of priorities over time. So, and what they're really trying to do is they're trying to manage, as Jeff pointed out, risk. Let's take as a great example someone in a medical profession, right? Who's in that millennial time frame, 29 to 44. Most people in the medical profession, if they really hurt their hands, they're going to be out of work. Think of a nurse. I can't hang a bag. I can't drive a needle. Or a surgeon, I can't operate, right? Or an anesthesiologist, I can't intubate. Those folks carry significant risk to their livelihood because they're a high earner. Any accident that affects their ability to perform their job is going to become debilitating for them. It's going to take them from being a high earner to an average earner or worse really quickly. How do you manage that risk? You can't manage that with a Monte Carlo simulation. So you've got to think now, financial planning, I think, has just changed over time to where some of the old thinking around financial planning just simply doesn't apply very well anymore. And that's where I think, Jeff brings up some really interesting points, and I hopefully brought up some more. Generationally, you've got challenges. Operationally, you have challenges, and none of those are really going to be dealt well with the old thinking of, let me throw together a Monte Carlo simulation. And Monte Carlo simulations, by the way, they're over a long period of time, so you're really planning for retirement. You're not planning for a lot of the other things. Why did we see goal-based planning explode over the past decade? Some of the reasons around that are people have other goals than just simply retirement. You're going to find that, by the way, a lot more in the younger generations. They want to be able to have more experiences. They want to be able to travel. They want to be able to, to do other things other than the Puritan view of, let me just work really, really hard and save for retirement and everything will be okay.
Yeah.
Jeff, anything else you want to add on how advisors can identify and adapt to those generational differences and needs in their practices?
Well, absolutely. And what I'll underline what John is saying there is he's identifying the importance of human capital. And for most wealth building families, it absolutely dominates their wealth, and yet they're completely unaware of it. So when you think about generational differences, the methods that you bring to solving the problem matters enormously. So when you think about generations, first of all, each generation is going to have a unique set of characteristics. Think of a personality. But what do they all have in common? And what everybody has in common is, we all have savings or investment portfolios. We have jobs or own businesses. We have pensions, Social Security, and of course, we have human capital. And think of that human capital as the present value of someone's future earnings. And as I mentioned, it's the biggest resource of most wealth building families, but it's not incorporated systematically into a risk management process. We also have, as John was highlighting, we have personal lifestyles that need to be funded, as well as other priorities that may relate to our family or our social influence. So we all have a commonality. Now, how do we differ though? And I'm going to underline this. One way is human capital. So let's say we take a typical 45-year-old mass affluent family. And let's say that they have a liquid portfolio that's worth $600,000. It's in their 401k, and their house is worth about $400,000 net. If you were to ask them, they would probably tell you they're worth about $1 million. But they're actually not. They're actually worth closer to $5 million. And what they're actually missing is the value. They're unaware of the value of their human capital and their Social Security that relies on their human capital. So what's really interesting is most people are already financially successful. They just don't know it. And there's really only two things they need to do in order to be financially successful. And the one of which is size their life to their resources, don't spend too much, the importance of budgeting. And the second thing is make sure they realize their human capital. So, if all I need to do is to realize my human capital to be successful, what would I do? Well, I'd buy life insurance, I'd buy disability insurance, and then I'd want to protect a reserve, a small pool of money. So if I lose my job in a downturn, I've got the time to retrain, find another job at a similar level of income, and start saving again for retirement. And so now when we think about it, let's juxtapose that, let's take a retired couple. And let's think about their human capital. Well, now their human capital, it's in the rearview mirror. So the earnings that used to pay the bills is no longer there. They actually need to be entirely self-sufficient. And this is where we actually need to apply a hedge to truly immunize an essential level of spending. So if stress does show up, they're prepared for it. Now, when you do this, by the way, you can endure pretty much what the world can throw at you. A hedge is your most powerful tool in risk management. So what I'll underline here is when you're applying more robust methods, you're basically able to personalize solutions across the entire life cycle of a family. It's just a dynamic process adjusting to the way their life evolves over time.
And John, I want to switch gears a little bit. So I know you've observed significant growth in niche financial practices. So what do you think is driving this trend, and how can advisors identify the right niche for their practice without limiting their growth potential?
Well, you think about it, financial advisors want to become the financial quarterback, right? The go-to person, the trusted advisor, if you will, to their clients. Well, let's take the example I used a moment ago, right? I would wonder how many financial advisors would think, hey, if the nurse or the doctor that I'm working with lost the use of their hand in an accident, would that really affect their income? Now that I've given you that example, you can look at it and go, well, of course it would. But most financial advisors who paint with that peanut butter approach across an entire business, like they look at their business not as I'm going to manage the risk of the clients that are coming to me. They look at their business as I'm attracting clients of a certain level of investable income, right? You've heard many advisors say, we work with families that are over $500,000 in investable income. We work with families over $1 million in investable income. That's great for investment management. It's not great for long-term financial planning and financial stability. If you're just going to manage someone's investments, don't bother doing financial planning. You're just kind of painting a picture. You're hanging a really great frame in the office, but you're not really doing it. If you really want to get into deep financial planning with your clients, you need to understand the risks that they're trying to manage. And that's not just saying focus on a niche to understand those risks. It's proven. When you take a look at financial practices today, and there are many studies out there that discuss the growth of financial advisory practices that are niche focused compared to the growth of financial advisory practices that are non-niche focused. Take one look at an ultra high net worth or a high net worth or a family office. Why are family offices outpacing RIA growth significantly? Because they're focusing on the risk management of only one person or one family. That's it. That's all they're concerning themselves with. So everything that they're doing, all the financial planning they're doing, the estate planning, the risk management with insurance is all focused on just the success of that one family. So it's not surprising that they're growing significantly faster than most RIAs. When you take a look at RIAs that are focusing on niches, they have the ability to really go deep, right? So I'll give you two really good examples of that. We've worked with a firm that's focused primarily on cops and firemen, right? Now, many of you know, Johnny, my father was a cop, my brother's a cop. So when you look at cops and firemen, at first glance, you would sit there and go, wow, that's not a niche I want to be in, right? Because they tend to be more middle income. They tend not to build wealth fast. But when you look at the services you can bring to them, one of the practices that we're working with is growing significantly faster than the other RIAs in their community. Why is that? Word of mouth. If you're looking for referrals, having a really good niche gives you a really great word of mouth, number one. Number two, when they come in, they can talk with them about, hey, if you get hurt, right, you can't rely on the city to take care of you when you get hurt. So we need to put together a financial plan that truly does set up your family for success if, God forbid, anything happened to you on the job. Those types of going deep and understanding the risks around the clientele that you are helping, I think can give you the ability to have a much deeper conversation with them. It gives you the ability to more rapidly solve some of the challenges that they're facing. And I think it gives you a really solid ability to grow your business significantly by bringing in and attracting younger talent, and then having that talent learn your process to be able to solve for these challenges that your client group has. So I do think that, there's an old saying in sales, the riches are in the niches. I do think that there's real riches there for RIAs that focus on these areas. And I think that you look no further than some of the studies that you see from Schwab and some of the other firms around RIA growth. RIAs that are focused on niches are growing faster. Look no further than family offices, and you can see that solving a specific set of problems can drive very, very significant growth for your firm.
Jeff, I want to dig back into, that total wealth approach to planning and investing that incorporates human capital, social security, and more. And so for advisors who are used to focusing primarily on investable assets, how do you recommend they actually get started incorporating these broader wealth components into their planning process?
Well, ultimately, we want to manage their total wealth. I mean, that's how we can actually build a meaningful solution that's going to create success for the family. And when we do that, we actually want to build a total wealth portfolio. So as we build a portfolio, a total wealth portfolio, we actually want to include their homes and their mortgages. A mortgage is an opaque type of leverage. It's elevating people's exposure to risk assets. We want to be aware of that. We want to fold in their human capital. As I mentioned, for most wealth building families, it just dominates their wealth, and yet they're completely unaware of it. We want to fold in their social security. For a typical retiring couple, the present value of their social security is worth somewhere between $1.25 million and $2 million. And what's really interesting about that is it's an illiquid, inflation-protected bond, perfectly matched to the way they spend money. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we fold Social Security into the bond structure so we don't unintentionally over-allocate to fixed income. We do the same thing with pensions. And by the way, when John was talking about niches, the police officers that they're managing, they have these massive pensions. It's a phenomenal resource and it's a fixed income asset. Is it being folded into their investment structure? As we work with more complex clients, we want to fold in their operating businesses, their properties, their other private assets. At every level of wealth, we want to fold in expected estate inflows that have yet to transfer from the generation above, insurance payoffs, or maybe wealth transfer structures. So when you think about the investable portfolio, it's not a standalone, let's say 60-40, the result of a risk questionnaire. It actually behaves more like a completion fund. It recognizes those other resources and then fills in the voids to create a comprehensive solution. Now, when you think about this, by the way, we just illustrated for a client doing this, their total wealth, and probably for the first time. If you're to take a typical mass affluent retiring couple, they're probably worth almost twice of what they think they're worth. And that's a really good day when they find that out, by the way. And the reason is they don't appreciate the value of any remaining human capital and the value of their Social Security. Now, the next question is, and by the way, I've built 3 systems for managing complex wealth. The last 2 were goals-based systems. But I don't use that word anymore, and for a very simple reason. And I'll give you an example. If you were to ask a very affluent family what their goals are, they'd probably turn off. And the reason they turn off is because they think that, number one, they think it's retail. And number 2, they've got so much wealth, it doesn't matter. They don't need to have goals. It's just an illustration, it's the wrong question. A far better question is, hey, here's your total wealth. Now, how would you like to allocate that wealth? How much of that wealth would you like to dedicate to your personal lifestyle? What would you want to accomplish with your family? How would you like to affect society in some positive way? It doesn't matter how wealthy you are. That's a really interesting question. And so now what we've done is we've helped the family to articulate the purpose of their wealth. Now, the other side of this coin, though, is there's a lot of threats to those outcomes that they've identified. And yes, there's market risk, and that's portfolio, but there's also the risk of their properties and their businesses and their personal risks. Think death, disability, personal liability, estate illiquidity, all of these things. And we need to address those. And what you'll realize, and John was highlighting this earlier, a Monte Carlo doesn't address most of those risks. So we actually need real personalized risk management. And we can apply hedges to immunize essential needs. We can apply insurance systematically, addressing properties and businesses and healthcare and personal liability. And we can apply protective reserves, among other solutions. Now let's go back to the portfolio for a second. So what we just did with this family is we helped them to articulate the purpose of their wealth. They've identified all of the outcomes that they have in mind. Now let's take each one of those outcomes and prioritize them. And the reason that's interesting is some of those objectives are essential to them. And if they are, we want to minimize risk. Some are important, we can take some risk. And some are discretionary, the client's telling us we can take more risk. So now when you step back from this, we actually now understand not only the timing, but also the suitability of risk and characteristic of literally every dollar they're going to spend in their life. And then we can take each one of those dollars and match it with a suitable asset allocation using an asset liability matching process. Now we have a portfolio entirely driven by the life that they envision.
You know,
And, yeah, John, go ahead.
I was going to make it, I really think you brought up something very interesting, right? Like, let's go back for a moment to even what you discussed in pensions. Having a niche focus and understanding how the pensions work for some of the clients that you're working with is incredibly important. In a lot of pensions, they're going to get inflation adjusted using CPI. Well, that's great. That's a backward look. It's not a forward look of where inflation is actually going. So when you discuss the ability to manage the risk of their future income, right, and be able to take into account their future income, you can't take that pension as a fixed number, right? And a lot of financial planning takes that as a fixed number and says, well, this is how much you're going to be making. But it doesn't take into account, this is your number, but here's where your adjustments are going to be, and here's where that might fall behind from inflation, the actual inflation you're going to see. So although you're going to be making, I don't know, whatever, $7,000 a month, $8,000 a month, you're actually losing value in that because it's not going to increase as quickly, or it's not going to adjust as quickly as inflation will erode its value. So for a whole host of reasons, again, just coming back to it, like a Monte Carlo simulation really fails to take those things into account very well. And more traditional views of financial planning struggle with that pretty significantly.
Yeah. You know, and to add to what you're saying, you know, I'll go to that typical retiring couple, mass affluent retiring couple. You know, they probably have a portfolio that's worth $2 million, but their Social Security is probably worth somewhere between $1.5 million and $2 million. If you don't know you have $2 million sitting in an inflation protected bond portfolio, you can be pretty sure your portfolio has very little relevance to your needs. And so what you find is most people are actually over allocated to fixed income because they're unaware of the role of that pension or Social Security in their overall structure. The other thing that, John, you're talking about is this needs to adjust dynamically because, you know, two things are happening with time. Let's say somebody has 35 years in front of them and they're retiring. We can actually calculate how many dollars are necessary to fund that 35 years. So what's happening is their bond allocation, it's not a percentage value, it's a dollar value. And the reason that's interesting is every year that they live, they actually have fewer years they need to protect. See, the amount of fixed income in their strategy is actually declining through time. Their essential needs in this story are protected for the rest of their life, but the amount of fixed income is declining because they have fewer years they need to protect. You know, what would a traditional solution do? Most traditional solutions would do exactly the opposite. It'd be increasing fixed income as people are getting older.
Yep.
And when you think about our business, there's a lot of things that we can do that add value to a client, but there are a few things that have the potential to have a significant change in the lifetime wealth of a family, the difference between those two methods. I mean, you compound for 3 to 4 decades on a declining fixed income portfolio versus an increasing one, the wealth differential is significant. Mm-hmm. That's why these methods matter so much. And so, you know, kind of getting back to this total wealth concept, you know, we need to look beyond the investable portfolio. Otherwise, we're just going to miss the bigger picture. And I think that's where really good advice starts to show up.
It's super interesting you made, like, just to put a point on something you just said, right? The risk profile is changing, but what you're doing to hedge against that risk is not.
Yeah.
And that's what's really stymieing their ability to generate significant wealth over a period of time. And if you think of, like, just take as an RIA, right? If you've got an ongoing concern as an RIA, in other words, you've got a succession plan, or there's someone you're going to sell this moving forward, what kind of, if you've got someone who has declining assets because you've got most of the people in retirement, how many RIAs are out there where the vast majority of their clients are already in the retirement phase?
Yeah.
So you're basically declining the value of your RIA business by overestimating the risk associated with the retirement money.
Yep.
And if that risk profile changed, if you more appropriately set the risk associated with your clients' portfolios, and you were able to change those allocations so that they continue building wealth even in retirement, what do you think the probabilities of you getting their kids as clients moving forward? I help to increase your parents' wealth into retirement. I help to increase your inheritance into retirement. I help to increase your value, your family's overall wealth, even as your parents were into retirement. And I did that in a way that didn't unduly risk your parents, and at the same time increase the overall family's ability to generate wealth. It's a completely different story to have to that next generation.
Yeah. And, to add to that too is, when you use a stronger method, let's say they have a declining fixed income, there's two beneficiaries of that, three beneficiaries, one of which is the client themselves. Their expected lifetime wealth is dramatically improved. The advisor is also managing more wealth. That's a good thing. And then finally is the expected transfer to the next generation is elevated. And when you're helping family articulate the purpose of their wealth, they're thinking about their family. They have these excess resources. What would they like to do with those excess resources? What would they like to accomplish with their family? And what it does, it sets up a conversation around, well, let's think about wealth transfer. Let's identify the purpose of why you're transferring the wealth. And that sets up a natural step as the kids get to maturity, build a financial plan for the kids. And you're basically pre-setting up the transition of wealth over time by integrating it into a multi-generational solution.
Yeah. So we've talked about the need for advisors to have these distinct service offerings for different generations, how niches can help you grow significantly, the importance of total wealth planning and investing. John, how can wealth tech solutions support in providing clients with all of these initiatives, with life cycle advice across these different generations and various niches?
Well, I think you've got to look at the solutions that you're currently using today and determine whether or not those solutions are actually fitting your need, right? So there's three things I think that need to happen. First, do you buy into the fact that goal-based planning and just trying to increase the amount of money for retirement is not the end-all be-all of financial planning, right? So the ability to manage while in retirement, the ability to continue to generate wealth over an entire lifetime is a different view for your practice. But if you do agree with that kind of view of your practice, then you need to look at the tool set that you're currently using, right? Now, for some of the generational changes, for some of the how the goals change over generations, or how the focus, the risk management focus changes over generations, I think that you can handle somewhat with some of the processes you have in your practice, right? The niches you can handle with processes that you create within your practice. That's not a technology problem to necessarily solve. The technology that you want to look at is, how do I start moving myself away from a basic Monte Carlo, or move myself away from a basic goal-based planning capability? And that's where there's solutions out there that you should take a look at, Libretto being one of them. But it really comes down to asking yourself the question first, right? What do I want to do to basically focus on niches within my practice? What do I want to do to basically change the conversation that I'm having around financial planning and around risk mitigation with my client? And if you find yourself getting to a point where you want to handle more high net worth individuals, you want to be able to run your practice more like a small family office. If you want to get to a point where you are focusing on niches, then everything that we've talked about so far is entirely applicable to you, and you've got to start looking at your processes and your technology stack to support that.
Mm-hmm.
To maybe add to what John is talking about, maybe there's a little bit of perspective. My personal background is actually managing the wealth of most affluent families. And so I've had 3 ultra affluent advisory firms catering to those families, and I built 3 systems for managing complex wealth. So what we're actually doing is, what we're talking about here is we're actually bringing ultra affluent methods to everybody. And by the way, these methods are far more important to people of normal wealth. You can make a lot of mistakes if you're worth a lot of mistakes if you're worth a lot of money. You can't if you're not worth a lot of money. And when you think about technology, there's often a tendency to kind of think of it like a checkbox. I've got a portfolio accounting system, I've got a planning system, I've got a CRM, whatever that is. But really, when you think about technology, you want to think about what are the methods that you're applying. That's actually your value proposition. Technology is just merely scaling that methodology. So when you step back from this, are you delivering a questionnaire in a Monte Carlo? Do you look like everybody else? Is that a more narrow delivery? Or are you using a liability-driven method where you're personalizing solutions that's applicable to any level of wealth? So when you personalize these solutions, you're actually addressing the unique circumstances of each stage of life. And kind of going back to those niches, that could be the unique characteristics of an athlete, women in transition, a doctor, a dentist, or ultra affluent clients, or among others. And so the key is when you're employing a liability framework for planning, it's ultimately personalized, but it's done in a scalable, systematic process. You're also managing and developing a total wealth portfolio, incorporating every current and future resource and liability of the family. You're applying comprehensive risk management, and then you're also able to systematize your wealth management delivery. So when you step back from it, there's 2 fundamental questions that everybody should be able to answer with a lot of rigor. And that one is, are we okay? Can you really answer that question with rigor? And that's really a strategy and planning puzzle. And the other one is everything covered. And that's really a wealth management question. Do we have the right insurance in place? Do we have the right entity structures? All of those different types of things. What you're doing here is we're basically talking about delivering what I would call as a virtual family office. And by the way, that's just a fancy name for comprehensive wealth management that's well done. And everybody can do that. And as you do that, you're differentiated in the market. You're leveraging that unique experience that you have in your niche. And when you can talk to a client and say, we work with families exactly like you, that's very compelling. And that's where market share is picked up. You win more business, you earn more referrals, and everything positive flows from that.
I just want to point out one other thing too that Jeff kind of touched on, and I want to bring a point to. You don't have to charge the same amount of money for this kind of work as you would charge for rank and file investment management. Okay, you can have additional financial planning fees above AUM fees that you can offer to people. So a lot of times when we talk with RIAs, they're very stuck in their, well, we charge this number of bips for our accounts, right? That's fine for probably the majority of your business. But if you think of your top 20 to 30% of your clients, you can bifurcate your business and offer this level of support, this level of capability, and then allow that to go by word of mouth through your existing client base. It gives you an ability to increase your fee structure with your existing clients or offer a different fee structure with your existing clients. Again, that's another differentiator out there, right? I mean, Johnny, I've written articles about alternative fee structures that have been published. I don't think that you have to offer everyone the exact same thing and for kind of the same type of price point or the same fee structure as everybody else. As Jeff pointed out a minute ago, if your value proposition and your fee structure sounds just like the person down the street, there is no differentiation between you and the person down the street. So you've got to figure out how do you differentiate, especially if you're in a really growing market, right? Think of some of the markets that are growing significantly for financial advice: Austin, Texas, Charlotte, Dallas, Chicago. These are areas where you're going to see increased competition. And if you're not beginning to take this into account, you're probably going to be the loser of that competitive battle.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to touch on AI for a moment. AI is transforming client communication and advice delivery. Jeff, can you share specific examples of how AI is helping advisors hyper personalize the client experience?
Oh, absolutely. We think AI is pretty fabulous and powerful. I mean, what it is, it really adds a powerful layer, extending the depth and quality of advice, as well as effective communication. So when you think about it, what's the information that you have at your disposal, by the way? When you're managing someone's wealth, you literally know every current resource, future resource, liability, objective, wealth structure. You know basically everything. That's a perfect environment to leverage AI. And the way that we use AI in our systems is there's 4 different ways. The first way is just to enhance quality control. We can identify data entry errors. We've also built quality control into Libretto, where you can compare a solution to standardized best practices, as an example. It also supports better advice. We can identify using AI potential solutions that might apply to that client's those unique circumstances. We also have an extensive learning center that's loaded with specialized knowledge that can be drawn upon in many different ways. And then we can elevate communication as well. Our systems will actually provide a discussion narrative. It'll draft an email to your client, so maybe the market just went down significantly and they're worried about if they're okay. It'll draft an email to their client, truly personalized, and basically address that very question. It'll also write a personalized strategy letter written to the unique circumstances of that client. And these are all very powerful client deliverables, and they're all crafted quite literally with a click of a button. And so what you're doing is AI is enabling people to deliver more robust solutions, better experiences, and communicate that effectively and efficiently. And that's what's really powerful about AI. So, we're very dedicated to advancing the use of AI in the systems, and it just makes the advisor more effective in working with their clients.
So, John, looking ahead, how do you see AI and technology and wealth tech continuing to reshape the advisor-client relationship, particularly when it comes to serving the unique needs of these different generations?
So, I mean, a couple of quick things, like AI is incredibly good at pattern recognition, right? So today what you're seeing is you're seeing note-taking capabilities, you're seeing some ability now with document interrogation using artificial intelligence, which I think are all very interesting, but it's still the opening inning, not even innings. It's the opening inning in using AI in wealth management. What you're going to see more and more moving forward is you'll see personalization as the next big wave, and then you'll see agents as the next wave after that. But beyond agents and personalization, you're going to see AI making connections from a pattern recognition perspective far beyond what you can see any individual financial planner or individual financial advisor do. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to that niche practice, right? So not to say that you're going to cookie cutter, you're not going to peanut butter everyone with the exact same financial advice just because you happen to be in a niche. But what you will be able to do is you'll be able to start drawing pattern recognition across individuals within your practice, right? And notice I said individuals within your practice. Getting to a point where you're designing individual advice, individual financial plans, individual investment strategies for each one of your clients is really right around the corner. And AI is going to open that up. Today, it's impossible for anyone to look at all of the ETFs and mutual funds available to them to determine which is the best one for their client, right? There's just too many of them. Moving forward, AI is going to be able to do that within a click of a button. So the ability for you to create a direct index or create a direct investment strategy that takes off-the-shelf products is going to happen significantly faster than anything you've even dreamed of being able to do today. So where we're seeing note takers was the first, and now document interrogation is kind of the second wave we're seeing in here. I do think you're going to see more and more around personalization in the next year. Then we'll get into agents because we're just a bit slower than the rest of the industries out there as far as agentic AI is concerned. And then we'll move into this ability to really craft not personalized communications, but truly personalized investment strategies and advice for individual clients. And that's what's going to be, because AI can process that level of data significantly faster than we can as human beings.
Mhm. So I have one more question here before we're going to move on to a few audience questions. But Jeff, as we wrap up, what's your vision for the future of financial planning? What should advisors be doing today to prepare for the next evolution in client expectations and industry standards?
I think our vision. First of all, don't think of your solution as a checkbox. Ask yourself, are you delivering really more robust solutions, and are you gaining an advantage in the process? So the core here is, lead the market. Exceed your clients' expectations. Don't just meet them. And somebody out there is going to be delivering more robust and compelling solutions. And those are the people that are advancing our industry and picking up market share. So the idea is that should be us. We should be doing those things. And so the other thing is, elevate your personal expertise. We've spent years building a very advanced learning center, and it's really designed to advance advisor knowledge. The more expertise, the more compelling, the more wins, the more clients, and so on. Communicate effectively and efficiently. That's why we have white labeled communication materials that enable people to be immediately effective communicating relevant topics. And we have one-click client deliverables, AI deliverables that are tailored to them. And then lastly is you employ next-gen technology that truly enables you to deliver that personalized advice. It's interesting, John was talking about personalizing portfolio. It already exists. As an example, when you think about protections and you want to put a hedge in place, our systems already will build a personalized bond portfolio, folding in a Social Security or a pension and truly building a duration matched hedge. When you think about equity exposure, well, have you recognized the client's human capital or maybe their other assets that they own in the way that you've positioned their liquid assets? Do they work for Google? Do they work for a startup venture company? Or maybe a small value-oriented company that's exposed to a downturn? The answer to that question should inform the way you build an equity structure. All of these things already exist. It's just a function of leveraging them and then gaining the differentiation and the ability to deliver more value to that client.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are the things, this is the future that we're living with today, and we're continuing to advance it. And that's what we're committing to building, is to lead the market and for the benefit of both clients and advisors.
Yeah. Well, let's tackle a couple audience questions here. So first one, with the adjustments to Social Security, do you foresee major impacts to the way that it should be included in a client's plan?
I think, a good way of framing that is we don't actually know what the answer is going to be in the future. But when you think about it today, I think most studies would suggest that in order for Social Security to be solvent, everybody would receive about 76% of their benefit. And but when you think about when we do solve Social Security, it'll go through a political process. That's what we're certain of that. And so, we don't know the answer, but it wouldn't be surprising if the older you are and the less you have, the more you get. And the younger you are and the more you have, the less you get. So you can actually systematize a framework that says, well, how much of my Social Security should I actually incorporate into that bond structure? And in our systems, we have the ability to do just that. So we're already enabling that to happen. One thing I will say, though, is that Social Security has been revamped many times before, and when it did, benefits were always increased. And I'm certainly not saying they're going to be increased, but it's not a given, because the most powerful voting bloc are those people that are receiving Social Security. So that's why I want to highlight it's a political process. And so I guess you could say there's reason to have some optimism around Social Security and not just pessimism.
Yeah. Another question here. Can you provide an example of essential spending investment solutions to hedge for a 50-year-old that is an ultra high net worth individual in the highest marginal tax bracket?
Yeah,
I'll hit this one first, Jeff, and I'll let you jump in. But there's not a lot of data there to go on, right? So again, like if they're in the highest tax bracket, you have to look at what is their occupation as well, so that you really are truly performing some risk management, right? But you know, if you're looking at trying to figure out ways to hedge for a 50-year-old who's in the highest marginal tax bracket, there's a couple of different things that I think you want to take a look at. So number one, based on their occupation, right, should they have some sort of level of insurance around the performance or the ability for them to perform that particular operation? Think back to the example we used earlier with a medical professional who may lose access to or lose the use of their hands. The second thing that I would say is, you know, it's funny, I moved into a 55 and older community, and everyone here tells me, you have a lot more money than you think you do. You can retire a lot earlier than you think you do, right? And part of that comes back to a comment that Jeff made, or several comments Jeff made earlier in this discussion, which is if you're taking a look at the earning potential that you currently have between now and when I hang up my hat, or you know, the ability to have my wealth continue to grow even as I get into retirement and I tap into less than I think I need, or the, you know, the time value of money associated with Social Security, all of those play a role in the conversation that the person who asked that question should be having with their client, right? And then finally, understanding what's important to that client. That client may want to slide into home plate with not a penny left, right? Like they literally paid, they hit the bus fare and slid into home plate with nothing. That's a completely different conversation from somebody who turns around and says, I have an ability and I have a desire to leave some sort of legacy for my family. It's a completely different planning discussion with a completely different thought process around it, you know. And then finally, you know, there are a lot of firms that are out there. There are a lot of insurance tables that are out there that will say the probability of that person passing away at whatever period they're looking at, right? Some of that's family history, some of that is just genetics. Like when are they gonna, what's the likelihood of them passing over time? All of those items play into answering that person's question. Almost everything I just told you, you can't model in a Monte Carlo simulation.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so if anything, if you take anything, whoever asked that question, if you take anything away from this discussion, you know, change the view that you've got, change your perspective on how you answer that question for that client, and ask much more insightful questions about what do they want that legacy to be? How do they want to live out those last days? What's the, not the goal, but what do they want their money to do for them in the end, right? And then look at things like their occupation and things along those lines. And I think all of that will inform you in a much more impactful way of how you want to provide financial advice to that particular client.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff,
Great.
please jump in.
Maybe I'll go slightly into the weeds on it, you know, on the question. Really great question, by the way. I'll start with a mass affluent family, and let's say that you have a mass affluent family, and they're going to immunize their essential spending. I'll say it takes, let's say, $2.25 million to put that hedge in place for the rest of their life. Their Social Security is probably going to represent about 75% of that hedge. And that, by the way, that gives you an insight into how powerful Social Security is and why it's so important. Now let's move to that very wealthy family. They may have Social Security, but it's really kind of a drop in the bucket to their overall wealth and the size of their hedge. So it's not going to be driving their solution. So the majority of their wealth is going to be held in more taxable environments. And by the way, a TIP is a phenomenal inflation hedge. And the problem with the TIP, though, is that during inflationary periods, the component of inflation itself is actually taxed. So in a low inflationary environment, the after-tax, after inflation return on the TIP is equal to a number. Let's say it's a positive number. But now let's say inflation goes to 8%. Now all of a sudden the after-tax inflation protected return on that TIP is actually negative, because inflation itself is taxed. Now, there are also, by the way, inflation-protected municipal bond portfolios, and they help to mitigate that inflation tax risk. And so that's a powerful tool that can be utilized with affluent families. The other thing to think about is entity structure itself. You know, in most mass affluent families, we generally like to use a Roth IRA for equities because it enables tax-exempt growth through time, has a lot of wonderful characteristics. But on the other hand, if a mass affluent family has a Roth IRA that has some assets in it, you know, it might be the most effective thing to do with that might be to put inflation-protected bonds in it, because you've completely nullified the inflation risk associated with tax, or the tax risk associated with inflation. So in short, you know, a solution is, it's both a combination of things like inflation-protected treasuries, inflation-protected munis. Social Security is going to contribute modestly to that ultra-affluent client. And then you want to think about entity structure as well, because those can be tools that enable you to solve the tax and inflation problem. Mm-hmm. And there's more nuance to it. That's probably a good entry.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up for today, guys. Thank you so much for this really insightful conversation. A lot to think about. Jeff, where can people go to learn more about Libretto and what you're doing?
Oh, you know, go to our website, you know, libretto.io, and there'll be, if you're interested in setting up a time to talk, there'll be a place to do that, and we would welcome a conversation and be able to dig into any of these topics in more detail.
Great. And John, I know you offer tons of resources for advisors and financial services professionals, and you have some other webinars coming up. Where can people learn more about those?
Sure, you can look at everything on our LinkedIn or on the website. And our website is www.theoasisgrp.com. We have 133,000 subscribers to the newsletter now. So if you're not subscribing to our newsletter, please do. And you can follow my LinkedIn profile and the Oasis Group's LinkedIn profile to see all the places we're publishing and all of the research that we've been putting out there.
Cool. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, both very much. And we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, you too.
See ya.